Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveller along I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, and took the other is just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. Both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I'm fairly certain most English speakers are familiar with this poem, whether they directly learned about it or not. It is used for making the argument or sentiment that one should take the road less traveled by. However, I am not so sure about this. So we're at a crossroads, a point in life where you have to make one decision and you can't undo it or choose the other after you've taken the one. I know that is what is metaphorically going on here as we see the lines, I could not travel both, and I doubted if I should ever come back. Last three words in the first line of the final stanza say with a sigh, which implies that there is regret or remorse. Now, sighing is not always a negative emotion. One can sigh with relief or sigh thinking about good times long gone. But in this case, I don't believe that is what is happening here. Let's go back to the first two stanzas, and we see that our point of view, looked down one as far as I could, implies the other was not looked down, whether it could not be looked down or it just wasn't really looked at. I'd argue that the other path in this fork just wasn't looked at very closely because we see in the second stanza of the line, and having perhaps the better claim. This seems to suggest that at a glance the other looked like it could have been the better option, and the perhaps would imply a seemingly sort of situation where it seemed like it was the better option, but ultimately it wasn't, which takes us back to that last stanza where we have with a sigh, suggesting that the sigh was one of regret. Of this second path, we also have the line in the second stanza in the middle of it, because it was grassy and wanted wear. So it's a life path that not many go through. It may seem very appealing and lots of people may want to do it, but just never do for whatever reasons. But the path is one that beckons and really calls to people, and it's just one of those things that most people would never end up actually doing, even though a lot of people would probably want to do in theory. Go to the very last line of the entire poem, and it says, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I think ultimately this last line, really last two lines, is more neutral than it is positive or negative, although it does follow that sigh, and I've already made the case for the sigh being a remorseful type of sigh, wishing that our point of view had gone down the more traveled path. But, after ages and ages hence, ultimately you can't change what happened. What's done is done. That's how it is. You still went about life, made the best of it, hopefully that you could, and that's where you are. You might as well make peace with it, because otherwise you're just going to be miserable regardless. Back in my high school days, my classes did look over this poem and discussed it, and we did come to the conclusion that the original intent was to not take the road less traveled by, and although it would seem special and fun and fantastic, unique, whatever, it ultimately would not be worth it, at least not for most people. And I haven't bothered to verify that since then, and I'm just looking it over myself with my own opinions at this point. So take it with a grain of salt, but really you should be taking anything with a grain of salt. I wanted to touch on this though, because it reminds me a lot of my childhood and what I see these days as well. I barely made it under the millennial label, being born in 95, so most of my childhood took place in the 2000s, and I know I, for one, like many others looking back, was not like other girls, and I couldn't do whatever, everyone else was doing, etc., etc. Now these days you have people who are making identities and taking mental disorders, whether they're actually diagnosed with them or not, and just making it them, their brand, to the point that they seem to think that's all they are, that's the best thing about them. At some point this was criticized as being special snowflake syndrome, which I can get to a degree, but to be fair, snowflakes are probably more unique, the real ones, I mean, that fall from the sky. The point I'm trying to make here is trying to be special and the ultimate individual, stand up from the crowd, completely unique as best as possible. Guys, it's not cool, and it's detrimental to your health and the health of society on whole. Just think it's interesting that what seems to be the original intent of this poem has been misconstrued over the years, and people hear it and they're like, yeah, we're not supposed to take the road that's more traveled that everyone else does, because we need to be individuals who do our own thing and, live our truths, blah, 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 when it's not really working, guys. Sure, there's exceptions to everything with exceptions. So for most people, this wouldn't work. And for a select few, yeah, okay, it will work. But the majority of all of us are not that select few. That's just how it is. It's just facts. And the more I look back on literature that either I happily partook in, or that I consumed, or that I learned about in school, whether I wanted to or not, and compare to what we see now and what people seem to make of it now, there's just so much I find fascinating about the disconnect. That's why I'm here. I want to talk about it.